of our healthcare crisis that we're
I'm
having.
so sorry. Who are you again?
Okay. This is Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida, and you're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. All right, so this week we are going to be discussing what has become an epidemic, what has become a large component of our healthcare, what you could say is a healthcare crisis or a sick care crisis in reality. As we continue to treat symptoms in conventional approaches, not getting to deeper causes. Diabetes.
So let's jump right into it, Doc.
All right.
And, I would love our audience to understand something about you and why I think you're so good at what you do. And the voice behind the scenes is the producer of the show. Doc, you obviously at some time in your life, not obviously, I know this, at some time in your life had a situation that affected you directly with somebody close to you that had diabetes. So
That's right.
How did you get involved? Why does this matter so much to you?
Well, to cut to the chase, my father died at a young age. He went into a diabetic coma. And as I learned last night, actually, it wasn't the only time. But he went into a diabetic coma. There was actually a written agreement between our family and the hospital that they wouldn't bring his blood sugar down below a certain level. And when he was being cared for by that hospital, it actually was brought down way below that number. And basically, it killed him. He died of cardiac arrest because his blood sugar was too low. And this is one part of the situation that happens with diabetics is they go into a coma as a result of an extremely low blood sugar. And so, my father had all along for years said that, frankly, that the medical care didn't know what they were doing as far as diabetes was concerned. And, I valued his opinion for a lot of reasons. He was a very smart guy. Might have something to do with, anyway, won't go there. But he was a smart guy and very well educated, and he had done a lot of research on diabetes himself. And he knew a lot about how it could be addressed. And he would have those discussions with the doctors up in Canada, which is where this all happened, or most of it. He actually died down in Florida. He knew that it wasn't being handled well. And that was an early message for me that was something that could be addressed.
So here's another question for you. I personally know the family, it was in my family on my ex-husband's side, that his brother at the age of 17 years old came home from a baseball practice, was feeling ill, and he was nauseous, and they thought he had the flu, so they're giving him apple juice and this other juice, and apparently things that had sugar, and at the end of the day, he wound up dying because of diabetes, and they didn't even know that he was diabetic. So how can one determine, and I know that was then, and this is now. However, today in the system, when you go to a hospital, and I'm just speaking by experience, depending on how much, if you have health insurance, if you don't, how much you're able to pay, that's going to pretty much determine in an emergency room the evaluations. You go in there, you don't know what's wrong with you. They start trial and error. At the end of the day, they say, oh, everything's okay, you're going home, and then the person winds up dying in the middle of the night. How can one, as a patient, as a person, what signs are there to determine that it may be diabetes? Or you may be diabetic.
Yeah, first of all,
when you're not aware of it.
Sugar in the urine is one. Ketones in the urine would be another, where you're burning fat. Um, an elevated blood sugar, and then there's a test called the A1C, hemoglobin A1C. but
Me
that's
as
not
a
gonna be done
person
very
though,
often.
right now,
Right,
I don't have the ability,
okay.
I'm in my
So
home.
signs and symptoms, right?
Correct.
So hunger, repeated regular hunger, kind of a drivenness and hunger, thirst, a lot of thirst, low energy, fatigue can be another. Weight changes can be part of it. So, you may notice kind of a sweet odor to your urine from sugar in your urine, things like that.
So that's how one can determine.
Yeah. Now, if you're getting all sweaty and perspiring all of a sudden at times, or if you're after eating a meal getting very sleepy, that can be an indication of sort of a pre-diabetic condition or a blood sugar regulation issue as well. Or if you're getting dizzy when you don't eat for a while, or you're getting very anxious, nauseous, anxious, all of those things, yeah. So those are blood sugar regulation issues. Quite often, not always. There can be other issues.
So here's another question then.
Yeah.
So now you go to the doctor, you're experiencing some of these symptoms, the sweatiness, the always dry mouth, feeling dehydrated all the time, blah, blah, blah. Now you go and you get your lab done. It comes back and they tell you you are borderline diabetic. And somebody said to me, there's no such thing. Either you are or you aren't. What happens when somebody receives a diagnostic as you are borderline diabetic?
Yeah, somebody's wrong. You not either are or aren't.
Okay, so that's
everybody's on a continuum. Everybody's on a continuum. Everything is on a continuum. There is no all or nothing. Okay, so this is one of the flaws in the approach to a lot of the ways that medicine is addressed, is that we have this bold writing on a lab that flags certain tests on the lab, and then the healthcare people look for the bold, basically glaze over everything that's not bold, just jump on the bold. That's an issue. Look into it, if it is an issue or not, and ignore what's not bold. That's all or nothing, right? That's that all or nothing view. That's a digital view, on or off. So in reality, we're all on a continuum. So we can have blood sugar regulation issues and not be diabetic, technically. Technically, the levels are 126 on your fasting blood glucose, an A1C of 6.5 or higher. These are some of the determining factors to say, yes, you're diabetic or you're not. But if you have an A1C of 5.7 or higher, then it's considered pre-diabetes. So there are levels that are determined there. And if it's 5.6 or lower, down to 4.9 or something like that, you're considered normal, and so on. So there are tiers, just like there are with blood pressure. There are tiers. You can have, stage 1, stage 2, or phase 1, phase 2 of hypertension. You can have where you're normal blood pressure, where you're just into the hypertensive area, and where you're extreme high. So things like that. So it's not all or nothing. It's not you are all the way or you're not. This is now in type 1, you could possibly say that in the sense that, at least theoretically, type 1 diabetics aren't producing insulin, whereas type 2 diabetics are still producing insulin, and they have a blood sugar regulation issue. They have an insulin resistance issue, and that's where we get into those measures I was talking about.
As you're speaking, so many things came to mind, and
Let's go.
I'm trying to pinpoint. But you said, so there's 3 types of diabetes,
Well, actually, nowadays, yeah, we do classify 3 types.
which
Type
is
1, type 2, and type 3. Type 3 is actually Alzheimer's.
what?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
So Alzheimer's,
it's considered a form of diabetes nowadays,
oh my
at least by some.
goodness.
Yeah.
So then what is dementia?
Well, dementia is a different issue. You can have senile dementia without
Getting to
having
have Alzheimer's?
Yeah.
You see how, we have so much information on the internet that you tend to read stuff and we think we know it all. But again, we go back to that hip bone's connected to the thumb bone, and as a person, as a consumer, as a patient, we really need to go and consult with doctors now, don't we?
It helps. So, a lot of the root causes are misunderstood too. Like frankly, by medical professionals as well that don't think about these things. Like, for example, stress. Stress is a huge factor that can lead to diabetes because it affects your blood sugar regulation. And when that starts swinging around or becoming more and more variable, that creates the insulin resistance that leads to diabetes. So stress itself can cause diabetes.
What's insulin, by the way? I hear it all the time.
Sure.
What is insulin?
It's a hormone produced by your pancreas. It is a hormone that basically goes in, gloms onto the sugar in your blood, drops down your blood sugar level, pulls up the sugar into your muscles to drop the blood sugar level. And what can happen is when somebody's insulin resistant, what's happening is they get kind of a lagging effect with the insulin. So the body has to overproduce the insulin to get the response of lowering the blood sugar. And then what happens is the body's overproduced the insulin, and therefore the blood sugar can get very low. So you go through these swings from low to high, and the larger those swings and the more frequent, the greater your A1C, your hemoglobin A1C, which is part of what drives you into being classified as diabetes. Now, insulin is not the only hormone produced by your pancreas involved in blood sugar regulation. And this is part of where the problems lie in the way that diabetes is treated. Everybody focuses so much on insulin, they forget, or maybe they don't know, that there are several hormones involved in the blood sugar regulation. And from the pancreas itself, we have also glucagon that's involved. Glucagon is, basically what we're looking at is glucagon responding to the consumption of proteins and conversion of those proteins, when those proteins are responded to, we get conversion of glucose from glycogen, that's a stored form of glucose, into glucose. And so what's happening is, in response to the consumption of proteins, we get sugar raised in our bloodstream. So a balancing effect is insulin balanced with glucagon. So what we want to do is not only be consuming the carbs that stimulate the production of stimulate the production of insulin, but we want to also be consuming proteins that stimulate the production of glucagon, opposing the insulin response. Does that make any sense, what I just said?
It does. You know what? And I think next time we talk about this, maybe we can get something on the website, with the YouTube as well. Actually, I looked at it as, when you say glucagon or whatever, I could see a superhero coming out and helping people understand,
Sure.
the differences and all this, because it is all connected. And I know this is a little off the subject, however, it still goes within the thought process, at least for me. Recently, I came across somebody that has been getting treatments for the kidneys, what is it that they do to the kidneys to clean them out?
Dilation
Yeah. And, but
or dialysis? I'm sorry.
dialysis.
Not dialysis.
And on the arm, he has these huge holes and it's looking disgusting and
Right.
awful. I mean, like, and he has this hole on one of the holes. He was putting a piece of paper to cover the hole. And it made me think of the same thing I was just saying right now, is how one thing affects the other and we don't realize.
Oh,
So
it's funny
here
that you
he's
bring that
going,
up.
he's
Yeah.
going for dialysis for his kidneys. However, he has this open wound and his arm has been destroyed and it looks nasty and disgusting. I'm not going to lie. And so it's like, oh my gosh, how does one learn or know one how to deal with these issues and how to pinpoint these issues?
Okay, so, conventional medical approach generally is to watch the numbers, and as you get lower and lower in specific parameters, basically watching until they come in with dialysis. There's really no proactive or very little proactive approach, yeah. So unless that person is specifically hooked up with a nephrologist who focuses on the kidneys and can help them through that process and maybe
Can you say
improve
that,
things.
Doctor, again? As the specialist is called a?
Nephrologist,
Wow, I had never heard of that.
yeah, that's it.
I have a neurologist, but
Yeah.
not the nephrologist.
Nephrologist, yeah. So nephrons are the filtering elements within the kidneys. And, but quite often, in conventional medicine, that's basically the only referral is to a nephrologist, to help with that. And, first of all, the fact that you brought up kidney dialysis is not off the topic, because actually one of the leading ways that people die from diabetes is because their kidneys start to fail. So that's not so far off the topic after all. But my approach is, first of all, when I see the kidney numbers, specifically GFR, glomerular filtration rate, and the glomerula is a specific tubule area within the nephron filter within the kidneys. Okay, and there's lots of these nephrons. To start to address the functionality of those filters and improve their function. And therefore, what I can do is catch early on when people are sinking into various stages of kidney failure or kidney dysfunction and turn it around and make their function more normal, and therefore keep them from going to that phase where they need to be on dialysis. And I've done this for over a dozen people for sure. Absolutely. I've got all the data, So if it's dealt with proactively and early, it can be turned around. They don't have to look at it as, I'm going to be on dialysis.
You just mentioned something so crucial, because I think people forget. People want to go to the doctor and talk to the doctor and doctor tell them what to do. And in all reality, they don't want to know what to do. Just tell me what to take. And once I'm taking this should solve all my issues. However, they also tend to forget. So even when you get a medication, it says, don't take it on an empty stomach, don't do this. But since they're not getting ill, they don't feel ill at the moment, they're thinking, well, I can take it because I'm not feeling bad. And then all of a sudden, then a kidney failure happens, or because they didn't drink enough water, they didn't do enough things in order, based on the way it's supposed to be.
It's an interesting topic.
And you just mentioned the word proactive.
Yeah.
So you and I know not that we're getting away from diabetes because it's all connected, but again, you as a holistic doctor, I think that's where the proactiveness is much more needed, and it needs to be understood in order for it to be effective.
Yeah, a lot of it is preventative medicine. Preventative medicine is something that's catching on more.
So how does
I've been doing it for a decade,
So how does one who already knows that I have certain things, or I'm already feeling certain things, and I'm already like in a hole, can I go to a doctor like yourself and with these issues and still have hope that these things are going to be taken care of? And how does that work?
Absolutely. However, the later, the worse, right? We want to catch things as early as possible and be proactive about them. Part of the problem is that conventionally people are getting 3 to 5 minutes in front of a doctor, and they can barely get a few words out before they've written a prescription for the next symptomatic treatment, and they're not really getting to the core of what's going on. So, things just continue to evolve and become worse and worse and worse. And I've had several examples of these things going on. I mean, it's been crazy how many of these situations I've been seeing. People are being measured on 2 basic tests, okay, CBC and CMP, complete metabolic panels, and CBC, or complete blood count. And, that may include differential analysis, which includes white blood cells versus red blood cells and all the types and stuff. The problem is that these tests, and I guess I could throw in TSH, that's kind of similar in a certain way. These are commonly used tests to determine, sort of quoting there, determine whether or not, or to screen for different disorders like iron deficiency anemia. You can look at hemoglobin and make a leap that, okay, if the hemoglobin's in a good range, then probably your iron's in a good range. However, I'm the lucky guy that sees all these people that are not in the good range, even though their hemoglobin's fine. So I know that these tests are not really precise enough to, catch these people. Yeah. So a lot of people are sliding between the cracks in this approach. It doesn't work, at least statistically, not to 100% for sure. There's a lot of people slipping between the cracks. I've seen, like, one of my assistants had iron deficiency anemia to the point of fainting in her car, having to put her head between her legs, things like this. She went to her physician, asked, okay, is it okay for me to give blood? They measured her hemoglobin and said, sure, fine, keep doing it, keep going. Kept running her blood levels of iron down further and further and further, to the point that she was basically at a deadly level of iron in her blood. Okay, that's one example. The opposite extreme has been seen as well. I've seen hemochromatosis. I mean, elevated levels of iron in the blood and elevated ferritin levels, which is basically stores of iron in the tissues, to the point that it's causing things like joint disorders that look like rheumatoid arthritis or diabetes issues, blood sugar regulation issues, all sorts of these issues, fibromyalgia-like symptoms, things like that, when all they've been measuring is hemoglobin to make the leap that, oh, their iron's fine. Okay, the same situation, that's why I brought up TSH, the same situation is true for TSH. The leap is made, oh, well, if your TSH is in a normal range, then your thyroid's functioning just fine. You're fine. See you next time. Oh, you have these symptoms and signs? Okay, let's get you on an antidepressant. That kind of response, instead of really looking into it or doing the actual testing of the actual hormones from the actual organ. They're making a leap that this means this. This doesn't always mean this. In fact, a lot of the time, if not most of the time, it's inaccurate. Certainly for TSH.
It's a scary world out there because, no matter what, we get all this information, etc. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that we are not doctors. We did not go to medical school. And I always think sometimes, I know my body. I don't need to go to anybody anymore because, and the reason why I think that way, because half of the time that I go, I don't feel that I get the right results, the right answers. I must put a disclaimer in there that I have gone to you in past years, and whenever I have addressed my issues through you, and normally I don't go anymore as often because I get to talk to you during this radio show, and I get a lot, and I follow what I listen to on the show, and I have had progress. with that being said, and I know that you need to be able to find a doctor that you can trust and listen to what they're telling you to do, because this is the other
Follow
challenge
through, yeah.
and this is what I was going to say, it's a proactive approach.
Yeah.
You can tell me what to do. I go home, I'll do it for 3 days, maybe 4 days. That's really not me, but somebody else I know. And of course, we always use that excuse, right? And after the 4th day, oh, it's just, and then you just stop and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, because we're living in this instant gratification wanting world, not understanding of, this proactive approach. So bringing it back to diabetes.
Exactly.
So we understand now in this short conversation that there's a lot of things that by not controlling our sugar levels, that's right now just talking about sugar, that's the one we're talking about today, even though we just heard that from sugar it could affect our iron, it could affect our, there's so many other things that get out of whack.
Yeah, thyroid's also related to that.
So there we go again.
Metabolism.
And you see, and that's why it gets so confusing for me, because I, throughout the years, have gone, before I even met you, I was going to a holistic doctor in the Tampa area. And it was when I was going through all my hormonal changes at its worst time, and stress was at an all-time high. And what I was given was some creams to put on my, I did it because I wanted it all natural. So they gave me progesterone and testosterone and creams. But then they gave me a pill, supposedly for my thyroid levels. But blood or nothing was ever drawn to reach these conclusions.
Are you serious?
For real.
Wow.
There were assumptions made. It's what I'm calling it assumptions,
yes.
Where you just used another word for it, when doctors are, just looking at the hemoglobin and not, well, so they're assuming. Let's put it that way, some other aspects, or overlooking, whichever way.
Yeah, they're making an inference, it's basically from whatever they may be using.
So from a general standpoint, first and foremost, well, let me come back to sugar then. So what things, in layman terms, what does one need to look for? Like we were saying originally a little while ago. So you said if you sweat over nothing, all of a sudden you start sweating, even if it's hot or cold, it doesn't matter. So drastic temperature changes could be one.
Well, that can be
in your body, meaning?
That can also be, actually, I should throw in that can be an adrenal response. And see, the adrenal function can affect your blood sugar. So that's really the tie-in to blood sugar regulation issues. When your adrenals are responding, if you break out in a sweat, like say you get sweaty palms all of a sudden, that's an adrenal response.
I get my neck goes up, my forehead.
I mean, unless we're talking about a menopausal woman with hot flashes and night sweats, a different subject.
That's where you gone.
Although there is some overlap, because the adrenals become more involved in your hormone regulation when you go into menopause.
So is it a little more complicated for a woman than for a man? Say it, come on.
Yeah, okay, I guess we could say that, yeah.
So for women, because we also tap on the hormonal part of our body, when it comes to these type of issues, it's a little more encumbersome for a female than it is for a male?
Well, unfortunately, it's not well dealt with, let's put it that way. There are a lot of issues as far as hormone balancing and regulation that are involved. And, it's hard for people to understand sometimes, especially if they have some understanding. There tends to be this kind of blowing it off. Oh, everybody goes through this kind of thing, especially with women who talk to other women. This is just, that's just normal. That happens. My cousin went through this. Oh, hers was much worse, and all this kind of talk. Well, none of the hormonal issues should be happening to begin with. That's what's not normal. And then on top of that, you may have the complication with the adrenals and stress in our lifestyles and so on affecting your hormones. And I'll get into that after after we take a little break. How about that?
Very cool. So
Yeah.
when we come back,
We'll talk about hormones and stress and how that is affected, and blood sugar mixed in there. Welcome back. You've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And we've been talking about diabetes and hormones and blood sugar regulation and how they're all intertwined, and preventative approaches and all the ways we can do things.
so before we went to break, we were talking about, we wound up, of course, I wound up intertwining all the hormonal issues that females we go through.
Right.
And we were talking about the sugar, etc. And it gets so confusing to know what really works. So understand, now that we understand more or less, and if you didn't get it, you could always go back on YouTube and listen to A Path to Wellness and this video on YouTube, or you can go to the website at rhinoonair.com and listen in. We had just reached a conclusion of all these different things, you know, how we're affected by. So what things can we do? And let's, could you give us a checklist?
Number one,
There you go.
relax. Exactly. Deep breathing, breathing in through your nose, breathing it in, holding it,
And what's that going to help me do?
and then helping it, letting it leak out slowly. So that helps you relax. That helps you de-stress, or helps helps you kick in a nervous system component that helps you relax. It's called the relaxation response. Herbert Benson from Harvard, like back in the 80s, wrote a book called the relaxation response. That's what you're kicking in when you do that. And that's number one. And this is all wrapped into a field that I've been exploring in my current PhD, which is psychoneuroendocrine immunology.
Say that 10 times fast.
It's like, what was that?
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Exactly.
But basically, it's especially the part that's psychoneuroendocrine. Okay, the immune system is affected by all this as well. But
interesting. I'm going to stop you right there. Psychoneuro. So are we talking also that has the effect that the brain and the thoughts create on our nervous system?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. So what we have is we have our pituitaries are hanging from the okay. All right. So it's a part of the brain. Okay. The hypothalamus's role is to monitor the blood levels of hormones in our blood. Okay. And then to turn around and stimulate secretion of various hormones in response to those levels to keep things balanced and keep us functioning.
Do hormones have to do with sexual desires?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Of course.
Okay.
Huge. Right?
Right.
Okay. Don't mean to say of course, but yes. Huge.
So when you're saying, so there's this little thing in my brain that now is monitoring and
Yeah.
sending out. So
It's a component of your brain. It's a pretty significant component. It's not little. The little thing comes off of the hypothalamus. That's the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland has two parts to it, the anterior and posterior part. The anterior part is more specifically hormonally activated, all of its hormones being secreted. The posterior part has a neural component. It actually has nerves hanging down from the hypothalamus into the pituitary. So there's a neurological response as well as a hormonal response. The same. That's the psycho from the brain being affected by stress or by whatever's affecting you psychologically.
Can a pinched nerve affect your whole, like your hormones and everything else? Well, you're having because of.
Yeah, not usually that way, because usually pinched nerves come in your skeletal system. This is before you get down to that level. This is up in the brain, before you even get south of the cranium, to like your neck and your vertebrae and so on. It's before
So if
that.
something's pinched to the neck, it doesn't affect what's
Right.
going on up here at all?
That's before you get to the neck.
Okay.
So, right. So we have this psychoneuro component, right? And then the stimulation of the endocrine response comes from the pituitary. The pituitary is the glandular portion that's hanging from the hypothalamus, but it's also part of the brain that is involved in secreting those hormones. And those hormones are mostly stimulatory hormones. Those are the ones like coming from the anterior pituitary, you have thyroid stimulating hormone, which I talk about a fair amount because I have a real issue with the way things are done. This TSH is used as a screen for thyroid disorders conventionally. Over 95% of physicians in the US at least are trained to use TSH as a screen. And if you show up fine on TSH, then you're fine on your thyroid. It doesn't work. It's not an accurate way of screening. And that's been proven over and over again in more recent studies since about 2012 or even earlier. But, a lot of people aren't keeping up with that and they're still measuring TSH to screen for thyroid. So that's something to be aware of. You might want to question or ask about those issues when you go see somebody about your thyroid. You know, are you going to test further than just TSH? You know, that's a good question. Other hormones secreted by the pituitary include luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Those are involved in your production of estrogen and progesterone. Okay, and this is true for men and women, both, but also testosterone.
That's right. Estrogen,
Progesterone.
and testosterone. That's what they gave me. And then a pill form that something though was made out of horse pee. And I think somebody said it had to do with the pill.
Progesterone, yeah.
Really?
It's synthetic progesterone. Progestin, it's called.
Is that healthy? I mean, is that?
No, there's been cases in studies where there's been cancers created and things like that. And
Because
there are warnings, and you know, California has labelers put warnings, you know, about progesterone being used, but really the form of progesterone they're talking about is the synthetic form, and cancers. Yeah.
Synthetic. So horse pee is considered
Is
synthetic,
used to create the progesterone.
which I would think anybody's pee. Pee is garbage. Water that's been processed. I don't know if it has
One
any
way to look at
nutrients at it, but when it comes to that, I just think if my body is throwing it out, it's because it doesn't serve a purpose, even though I feel that my body is flushing out good things also through the urinary tract as well as it's doing the bad stuff. So that's the only reason why I thought, well, hopefully for the horse, when they're using the pee for this thing, there's some goodness in it, but I just don't get it.
Well, there's an interesting link to that in what's going on. And I've been writing about this, blogging about it and stuff.
Where is your blog?
There's one on EduBlog. I think it's Dr. Jackson or Dr. Jackson at drjackson.edublogs.com or something like that, or .edu.
They can find it on your website.
I don't know if we have a link on that, but maybe. Yeah.
Alrighty. And if any questions, contact Rhino and Aaron. We will
Sure.
find you, Dr.
Okay.
Jackson's information, whatever it is that you need to know.
And I have written on it in Tampa Bay Wellness Magazine.
And what
a
is
little
it?
bit, like when I did an article on men's health back in, I think, August of 2015, or yeah, that's about where it was, somewhere in there, on men's health. And I talked about, or no, it was actually on weight loss. And I said, weight loss is not a simple matter anymore because, you know, speaking of us or urine and what it carries, we carry a lot of things that come from the drugs that are being taken by people that are, some of them are xenoestrogens that can affect hormones, from plastic bottles, xenoestrogens, from vaccinations that include thimerosal in them. You know, there's been a big promotion lately for vaccination for flu vaccine, and they're saying now, don't use the inhaler type, use the injection. Well, the injections contain thimerosal, which is a form of mercury, has mercury in it, and that affects thyroid function and your endocrine system. It's an endocrine disruptor, screws up your hormones basically, and with developing children can affect their brain and can lead to issues like autism and so on. And that is a fact. That's not really debatable. Research shows it very well. I know they want to glom over this and argue about it, but it's in the research.
How does it make you feel as a doctor when you can be out in a public place, people don't know you're a doctor, and you know, you hear some topic and you're giving your opinion, and people come and debate it in such a way that sounds so convincing that everybody else that's around them does not actually believes what they're saying over what you're saying because it sounds convincing. I'm sure that must be like a kick in your stomach every time. And does that ever occur to you?
That's like being at a Donald Trump rally.
There you go.
But,
There you go.
but yeah. Well, actually, it's
I only make that
interesting.
comment because it's so hard in this day and age. You know, I reached a conclusion recently that I haven't gotten slower. I understand now that what's happening is that the world is just moving faster. And I think that has been the same for within the last 100 years, because so many modernizations for modern living, etc., has
Sure.
occurred. So each generation feels that now when you get older, you're staying behind, and the younger ones look at you, oh, you're old, you don't get this, you're not moving. And I finally became comfortable with the thought that I'm not moving, I'm staying at my same pace. Everybody's moving faster. And I choose not to move faster or as fast. However, I do not want to stay behind the times either. So being able to connect those two. Thinking, with that being said, coming back to you as a doctor and doing holistic medicine, how have you, what words of wisdom can you provide to those that are out there right now within that have no clue what's going on with their bodies? They really don't have health insurance anyway. It's true that most natural doctors or holistic doctors don't take health insurance, but it doesn't really matter in these days anymore, because half of this stuff I want to do anyway. I wanted to pay for it anyway,
Frankly,
and the
yeah,
deductibles and everything
your
else.
deductible's gonna be huge. It's not gonna cover it anyway, so what's the matter? I mean,
So-
what does it matter? And
So you said number one.
it's not gonna cure anything for you anyway either.
So you
no.
said the number one thing first was relax.
Yeah, relaxation.
What would be
As
number
far as,
two?
I think we were talking about blood sugar regulation and
Correct.
hormones, right?
Correct.
So yeah, relaxation is huge. Stress is huge as a factor in influencing your hormones. This is one of the things that I address in all of my infertility work, which I've been doing a lot of. I've had
So am I supposed to take drugs to relax?
no.
Good. That's what I was hoping.
Unless you have a Xanax deficiency, which I don't think is even
Nobody-
a component of our bodies. So,
Exactly, right? Thank
Right.
you.
so no, I mean, you get to the root cause. You know, why are you anxious? And in a lot of cases, it's adrenal. In a lot of cases, it's thyroid. It can be things like iron deficiency. Iron deficiency anemia can make you feel anxious. There's several things, and then there can be, you know, family of origin issues, truly psychological issues. But I find, and you know, that's kind of the focus area on the current PhD I've been working on, is more the behavioral medicine, the underlying physiological issues that relate to psychological disorders. So that's what's getting to the root cause, you know. So
And believe it or not, we're 5 minutes away
Yeah,
from
so-
the end of the show. Today, when it comes to, let's stay on the topic then of sugar,
Mhm.
even though we have also mentioned iron, and for a female, I know iron is huge because
definitely.
every month we are releasing so much out of our bodies that, and I have to admit, I forgot about that.
From menstruation.
Yes, from menstruation, that I know iron becomes a huge factor
That's right.
for us females.
Okay, so if you're a woman who around your period are getting very fatigued, maybe even feeling weak, so tired you have to be in bed, you might have to take a day off work because you just can't do it. That kind of scenario, you need to have somebody look at your iron, and don't just let them look at hemoglobin. You want iron, and if you have to do it by, you know, going to a walk-in place or one of these places where you can buy the labs, or come see us, you know, at a Path to Wellness if you're local, or even if you're not, you know,
Come
we
see
can
us.
talk to you.
You
On
do
the web.
YouTube, which by the way,
Skyping and things like that.
do
Yes.
you do telecom, you know,
Yeah.
through
Yeah,
conferences?
to a certain
Skype?
extent.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, to a certain extent. So another component, just let me get in here, is that, okay, so the stress, how does that affect things? Well, I mentioned earlier, no, I didn't actually. Let's talk about cortisol. Okay, so we have cortisol created because of a stress response. The cortisol includes different kinds of corticoids. Okay, there's metal corticoids or mineral corticoids, and there are glucocorticoids. So the glucocorticoids, you can hear from the name, is glucose related. So you have glucose in those molecules. So whenever you're secreting the glucocorticoids, you're increasing your glucose levels or your sugar levels in the blood. So So by being stressed, you're increasing sugar in your blood, and that leads to the scenario of these sudden changes and shifts and highs and lows in blood sugar that then
If I
interact
start
with
sweating and
insulin and so on. Yeah. So that's part of how you can make yourself diabetic with stress.
how do we balance this naturally?
Okay, well, one way is to look at your diet. I mean, just totally try to balance the major food groups: protein, fat, and carbs. So basically, carbs simulate a response of insulin, okay, that rushes in, grabs the sugar from the carbs and shoves it up into your muscles and drops your blood sugar. Protein triggers a glucagon response, which I mentioned earlier. That takes stores of glycogen, converting them to glucose. That goes into your bloodstream, raising your blood sugar. So that opposes the insulin. Both of those have kind of a spiking or reactive
So somebody who's
response.
diabetic who sits down to have a sirloin steak with white rice and corn, for example, because corn is high in
It's a
carbs.
starch.
It's a carb.
It's a starch, yeah.
Rice is a carb.
Yeah.
And a huge steak is protein.
Yeah.
So if I combine those three elements, I'm not doing anything healthy for myself.
Not necessarily, it depends on the proportions. And then fat is a component of that as well. You know, so fat gives you a response from what's called somatostatin. And basically that's a leveling off, has a leveling response. So you have this spiking response of insulin, this spiking response of glucagon, and to calm them down, you throw in some fat. So it's protein, fat, and carbs. The carbs, though, if you use starchy carbs, you're going to get a lot more sugar, a lot more glucose. It breaks down far more easily into glucose, which is the lowest form of sugar, the most broken down form, and gets into your bloodstream really quickly. So to calm that down and slow that down, you want to eat good carbs.
I thought you didn't tell me I could have a glass of wine or something. That's easy.
But the other carbs are the greens. I mean, the vegetable carbs. You know, you can have, if you're going to have a starch, you can choose, instead of a white potato or rice or corn, have some squash, butternut squash, sweet squash, very nice squash. You can have that instead. Or if you want spaghetti, have spaghetti squash. Much less, much lower glycemic index, much lower carb level. You know, if you want mashed potatoes, steam some cauliflower and mash it, and put a little, you know, whatever you want on that, and flavor it, and it'll be just like eating mashed potatoes.
I don't like cauliflowers. At least I think I don't. I'm going to try that. See how I can make them as a mashed potato.
Sure.
Mashed and salt, pepper. Can I put salt?
Sure. Yeah.
The
To a certain
salt,
extent. You don't want to
pepper.
overdo it, obviously.
Yeah.
So that brings us to
Almond
another
milk.
factor in there, that's iodine, but that's for another show. So
There you go, and right on the hour. You're phenomenal, Doc. You know, it's always a pleasure to listen to you. We are about to go on 5 years on October 7th.
that's
That
quite a
you've been
landmark.
on Rhino and everything. Yeah, it is a landmark for us, and I'm so honored and proud to have you here. And I'm looking forward to see how we wind up in the next 5 years. And I know they're going to be phenomenal. So what can we expect to hear about next Thursday?
I'm contemplating the idea of genetics, talking about genetics and, you know, the kinds of testing we can do to determine whether you have genetic components that can influence your responses to certain metabolism or
As you
metabolic
speak of
processes.
genetics, and
Yeah.
I'll just say, I don't know if something you can talk about also, but it's, to me, it's interesting. Genetics, does that go in hand with DNA?
Yeah.
It's because I was just, and this is totally off the wall, but when you go to these sites and if they now do your DNA testing, and by your DNA, they can tell you if you were from Africa, from China,
Sure.
from wherever you're
Yeah.
at. So it comes together as the same thing.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is using it diagnostically, or at least for screening of conditions like MTHFR is a good example. which is methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, which is an enzyme. If you're positive for MTHFR, you may have homocysteine problems, things like that. I'm getting way ahead of myself, but these kinds of issues, looking at testing for a lot of things. Mine's getting flooded here, so.
It's okay. Well, I'd like to remind everybody also that if they have any questions that they would like for you to respond to, they can either go on Facebook and put a note on there. They can send you an email. They can send it to Rhino on Air to you directly from your website. But that you are more than glad to address questions or have call-ins during the show, correct?
Sure.
Alrighty, cool. So with that being said, it's all you.
Okay. You've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com, and if you'd like to get a hold of us at A Path to Wellness, you can reach us either by phone at 727-329-9637, or you can take a look at the website. The easiest way to get there is short form is APTW, short for obviously A Path to Wellness, A Path to Wellness, aptw.net. And take a look there and see if your questions are answered, or find the contact information, etc. See what kinds of issues we deal with. It's quite a range, so you might be interested. And we look forward to speaking with you next week.